Browns are ready to take the practice field for the first time in 2025 shortly. Last night, Tuesday evening, the Browns released some injury news we were all waiting for. We're going to talk about it, break it down a little bit now on a bonus Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network. I am your host, Jeff Lloyd, and on behalf of all of us here at the OBR, we always appreciate all the support, whether you're coming for the fantastic written content from our group of writers daily, or you're joining us every evening on the Browns streaming network beginning at 6 p.m. Eastern with Browns 3D. You had the React last night. You had Garage Beers last night. You will get tonight at 6 o'clock another episode of Browns 3D. 7 o'clock, you will get OBR Weekly with Fred Greetham and Barry McBride. And after that, of course, our Jacob Roche with a little summer scouting. Make sure you check out. I believe Jacob's going to focus a little bit on the centers of the 2026 draft class. Came out a little later last night than normally would have been anticipated on report day. I know it was out in time for the guys to cut it up a little bit on the React. Pete Smith, Brad Ward, of course. We're going to go a little bit more into detail now. These are the injury designations of players either on the roster or no longer on the roster as of about 7 p.m. Eastern last evening. The Browns waived wide receiver Jalen Hill, non-football injury. Most likely Jalen Gill failed his physical. Placed on the active non-football injury list, wide receiver David Bell. Not really sure what the status is with David Bell. As we all know, it was a very, very disgusting dislocation of a hip last season, suffered in Jacksonville early in the season. David Bell, who closed 2023 strong and looked to be one wide receiver who was performing up to snuff early in 2024. We'll see how long it takes for David Bell to come back and maybe continue his opportunity and fight to stay with the Cleveland Browns in 2025. Placed on the active, physically unable to perform list, quarterback Deshaun Watson, defensive tackle Mike Hall. Of the four names here, Mike Hall obviously is the big one here. I don't know that this designation is technically a surprise. We all know it was a severe MCL injury that Mike Hall suffered in the season finale at the Baltimore Ravens. Hate to see guys go down that late in the year. And it's because of the fact that, especially with such younger players, you were now trying to ramp up yourself, ramp up your game, ramp up your body, whether you think you need to get quicker, whether you need to think need to get stronger, lose weight, add weight, all of those things. But any of those things are extremely difficult to do when you were obviously in the surgical recovery / rehab process. What we know on Mike Hall. Mike Hall recently came back to the Ohio area, had spent some time out in California. It's not that Mike is not working out. It is not that, Mike is far, far away. Mike has been, rehabbing, has been training out in California. We feel that it's certainly just not ready to be practicing just yet, and that is certainly understandable with the degree of the injury that Hall suffered in Baltimore last January. Where it kind of gives a little bit of an issue to the Browns defensive tackle room right now. Obviously, the room right now, is the way it looks, is you have, first round pick Mason Graham. You have Malik Collins, who you signed in the offseason. You have Shelby Harris. You have, of course, Juwan Briggs, and of course, Mike Hall. The way it looks, and the thing is, what they were really hoping for is that Hall, who they feel could be a severe damaging presence in nickel and dime situations. The thought, of course, is Hall, who didn't play a ton at Ohio State, just due to the overall depth. You go to a school like Ohio State, everybody plays. And it was one of the reasons that Mike Hall opted to go to the NFL early. Ideally, your starting combo is going to be Mason Graham and Mike Hall. That's certainly kind of in limbo right now. You do have Shelby Harris, who can certainly step into the starting position. Shelby Harris is a defensive tackle that can certainly contribute for them as, a run game guy and has certainly been competent enough as a pass rusher. Collins is just not a starting defensive tackle in the NFL. And this is not a knock on Malik Collins in any way whatsoever. The strength to Malik Collins' game is his pass rush ability. We know that. We've seen that. That's what's been proven for Malik Collins over his time within the NFL. So you were not going to take a guy like Malik Collins, have him become a starter, and then essentially become a liability. You want Collins ready to go in nickel and dime situations as an interior pass rusher. Right now, he is probably the most proven interior pass rusher the Cleveland Browns have on their roster. This maybe opens up a spot for Jawan Briggs, because my feelings in regards to Shelby Harris is I thought there was maybe a chance that Shelby Harris would end up the odd guy out here. You're not going to dress 5 defensive tackles on game day. You're ideally going to dress 4. So you figured between the youngsters and this great young nucleus that I think the Browns are developing at the defensive tackle position, and of course, Graham, Hall, and Briggs. I think Jawan Briggs' play last year was extremely underrated. So with those 3 and then Malik Collins, you kind of feel like Shelby Harris is the odd guy out. Shelby Harris at this stage of his career is probably not going to be a practice squad player. He is probably somebody that would be valued or had value to one of the other 31 NFL teams. But now with Hall's unavailability currently, and for us not knowing exactly when Mike Hall can or will be able to participate in training camp, it certainly leaves a void for the Cleveland Browns. Now, Harris, again, I think this is somebody that as we get later on into the summer, if things are going well for the Browns defensive tackle room the way it is currently constructed, Harris could be a late summer trade chip. Maybe that's not the case now, as we don't know with the status of Mike Hall. And there is no reason to rush Mike Hall. The Browns have a lot of belief in what the overall potential of Mike Hall is. So having Hall rush back is just not ideally something that would be, very smart to do. It's just not an intelligent plan or play with somebody that you have high promise for. And, Hall is probably just a little bit behind the 8 ball in general. We all know about the time that was missed in his rookie year in 2024. There was an injury. Obviously, there was an off-field incident which led to a suspension. And then Hall, basically got going again, at about week 11, week 12, and, was starting to show signs of, catching up to the NFL game. And then, unfortunately, the injury in week 17. This, for me, Jawan Briggs is certainly a guy to watch here, because I think in the scenario is you basically have Jawan Briggs showing if he has grown as a player and can improve. And I think Jawan Briggs, honestly, was a little bit underrated last year. But I think you have Jawan Briggs trying to step up, which would maybe, again, that's where I see that maybe Shelby Harris becomes eliminated. So this maybe derails things for the Browns currently with Hall's injury, and certainly in the uncertainty, of course, of when Mike Hall is expected to return. This Cleveland Browns defensive tackle room right now, in my opinion, it's probably on some of its strongest footing than it's been in the time that I've been covering this team since 2017. The Browns, at times, it felt like the position was just being ignored altogether, and they just weren't focusing necessarily on it. But now, with the high investment of a first-round pick in rookie Mason Graham, a high investment last year in a second-round pick in Mike Hall, and Jawan Briggs, yes, he did go in the 7th round of the 2024 NFL draft, but for a lot of folks, it just seemed like a head-scratcher. People liked his game. The athletic testing was good. Everything lined up for Jawan Briggs, and then there was maybe a question about his age, but it just never looked anything like Jawan Briggs was a guy that should be available in the 7th round. Certainly, that was a coup for the Cleveland Browns. But now for the Browns, and this is what I'm talking about having this strong footing, is you have players who are under contract here for quite a while. And that would be, of course, Graham, Hall, and Briggs. Having a veteran like Collins, and look, learning how to rush the passer from the interior is not easy. And, it takes a lot of extra skill that maybe edge rushers just don't necessarily have to work on as much. Edge rushers, a lot of these guys, you can just win on speed. You can just win on athletic ability. It's not that easy to disengage from a 320-pound off interior offensive lineman or throw him around, ragdoll him around, and then just make a beeline for the quarterback. Very much different on the interior, of course, within the NFL and with NFL pass rushers. So your news is Mike Hall is getting there. Michael Hall is not there just yet. And it'll certainly be TBD, to be determined, on when Mike Hall is able to start putting the pads on, participating in practice, and then ultimately returning to the Cleveland Browns defensive line rotation. Of course, Deshaun Watson as well placed on the active, physically unable to perform list. First off, I don't think any of us even know where Deshaun Watson is in regards to his injury and recovery. Two Achilles surgeries so quickly back to back. But I mean, let's be honest. This is the way it's going to go. Deshaun Watson is going to be under basically this tag for the entirety of the 2025 season. And somehow, some way, this will be very similar to what Deshaun Watson goes through next year in 2026 before the Browns are in position to move on from Deshaun Watson in March of 2027. Basically, the Browns situation with Deshaun Watson is don't call us, we'll call you. And maybe Deshaun's camp saying, oh, wait, we got a new number. And I don't worry, we got it. Deshaun Watson is basically about as far away from playing for the Cleveland Browns as you guys or myself. The Browns have officially moved on. Unfortunately, monetarily, contractually, he still kind of has to necessarily be under the umbrella of the Cleveland Browns until March of 2027. I think we've spent as much time on number 4 as we absolutely need to. This does not change anything within the Cleveland Browns quarterback room. We have known since January that Deshaun Watson's time with the Cleveland Browns is essentially over as far as him playing for this franchise. We now, and this will begin, of course, on Wednesday afternoon, we now begin to find who at least is the first one up as the week 1 starter for the Cleveland Browns. I think everybody and a lot of people want to report, that it is Kenny Pickett and Dylan Gabriel as maybe your leaders of the pack as far as the veteran, as far as the rookie. I think a lot of people are just simply doing that because Kenny Pickett was acquired first and Dylan Gabriel was drafted over Shedeur Sanders. I don't see or agree with the notion either way. I don't agree with Pickett as your top veteran quarterback, possibly the one to start week 1. I don't agree with Dylan Gabriel being the rookie with the closer shot to potentially starting over Shedeur Sanders. Kenny Pickett, and I think everybody is been so enamored with the Sam Darnold that we just try to find any quarterback who, had some time, maybe had a little success, and has now, been phased out of any opportunities. And by the way, again, the Sam Darnold should actually be called the Geno Smith. But just because it happened for a Geno Smith, just because Sam Darnold had one good year in Minnesota, does not mean that this is now going to be this trend in the NFL where all of a sudden quarterbacks, and unrightfully, I'll admit, I believe that these NFL franchises are giving up on their quarterbacks way too soon, especially considering the investment that is put into some of these quarterbacks as high as they are drafted. If you were a first round quarterback in the NFL, you would assume your team's going to give you 3, if not 4 seasons. There's a million variables that could go into why a quarterback struggles or does not struggle so early in his career. And most of the time, what you can do and what you can see and what you can point to is you look at the quarterback, you look at the franchise, and you look at the stability. Where was the coaching staff? Is it still there? Is it now gone? Was the player the fit for your system? Did you alter your system to fit the best strengths of your young quarterback? Again, a million variables go into this, but so many times you see a team who may be drafting one, two, three, four, five in the NFL draft. They try to draft the quarterback as the savior, but meanwhile, the head coach, the offense, everything had been struggling. So maybe it wasn't necessarily that the quarterback that was playing for you wasn't playing well. Maybe it was the fact that, your coaching staff, your system just wasn't good enough. So then what happens? Now you have a quarterback either going into year 2 or year 3. And guess what? It's a brand new coaching staff. It's now another offensive system. And things just end up not working out. But we just can't assume because of guys like Geno Smith and because of guys like Sam Darnold that every quarterback who had a little rough patch in his career then sits and watches for a little bit is all of a sudden going to just come back and play at a Pro Bowl level. It's foolish. There's just not enough evidence to prove that this is legitimate. So, that kind of needs to go away. Kenny Pickett, and I think he got a bad rap in Pittsburgh. Now, Kenny Pickett certainly was not playing to the level of prime Ben Roethlisberger. But in the 2 years that Kenny Pickett was the primary starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers went to the playoffs both of those seasons. So I'm not going to just go out and flat out and put my fist down and say Kenny Pickett was getting it done. Was not completing a large percentage of passes. He was committing turnovers. But the Steelers, in my opinion, lost faith early. And I think maybe that was because at the end of 2023, going into 2024, players like Russell Wilson were available. Players like Justin Fields were available. So they opted for basically the unknown as opposed to, the 2 years and the time they had put in with Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett was available. There were not teams who had quarterback openings who were going to chase him down. They were not looking to acquire him. So certainly made for a strange scenario for Kenny Pickett. And it seemed even stranger when he went to a team like the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles spent one season with Kenny Pickett. So behind Jalen Hurts, it was Kenny Pickett and it was Tanner McKee. And as everybody knows, I was lobbying very hard for the Browns during the offseason. I looked at the Eagles roster. Hell, we looked at everybody's roster as far as quarterbacks that were available. For me, McKee was one that kind of stood out to me. Big, tall, pretty strong right arm. Kind of reminded me a little bit of Joe Flacco. Now, they ultimately got Pickett. I'm assuming the Eagles just probably did not make McKee available after what was seen last year playing between Pickett, who played sparingly for the Eagles in 2024, didn't play terrible, but McKee certainly looked like the guy who was going to settle in as the future number 2 behind Jalen Hurts. I would rather play Joe Flacco because I have a longer track record from Joe Flacco than I do from Kenny Pickett. And it is certainly a positive for Joe Flacco that he played with the Cleveland Browns in 2023 and played well. Wasn't a long run, as we all know. And it certainly did not end well January 2024 in the playoffs against the Houston Texans, a team that Joe Flacco had torched a few weeks earlier on Christmas Eve in Houston. Keep in mind, C.J. Stroud did not play that regular season game against the Houston Texans on Christmas Eve. The question, of course, is if you have Flacco become your starting quarterback at 40 years old, what is real as far as expectations and just how much Joe can play? It's certainly a big, big guess to assume that Joe Flacco can give you a full 17-game season and then the playoffs. It's father time, man. That's why I believe, and again, if you want this team to try and contend out of the gate, it's Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco gives you your best possibility of contending right away. Again, it comes with probably a stamp on your card of maybe when Joe just doesn't physically have it anymore. He played a good amount for the Colts last year with all the injuries to Anthony Richardson. He certainly played much better for the Browns in 2023 than he played for the Colts in 2024. And ironically enough, Joe Flacco throwing some interceptions against the New York Giants in week 18 of the 2024 regular season is what led to the Cleveland Browns getting the number 2 overall selection in that draft class. Of course, opting to trade out of the number 2 spot. Gabriel, and when you use all of the superlatives and adjectives about a quarterback that come from film work, whiteboard, it does kind of tell the tale sometimes. We know that Dylan Gabriel has physical limitations. He's just not a very big guy. Doesn't have a very long arm. His arm is stronger than people think it is. His arm is stronger than people give it credit for. But you have to understand that Dylan Gabriel, in his final year in Oregon, played in a very, very offensive friendly system. So while Dylan Gabriel had a monster season last year for the Oregon Ducks, I am of the belief I just don't know of Dylan Gabriel's game at Oregon translates to being an NFL starter. Sorry if I sound like the party pooper. Of the Browns' 2 rookie quarterbacks, you guys know my belief is in Shedeur Sanders. I think Shedeur Sanders, through his film at Colorado, you saw the throws being made. You saw the NFL throws being made. He has no fear. And that is something certainly that can bite you in the can as you transition into the NFL. But, I'd rather you go down swinging than you go down getting sacked. Of course, sacks were a big, big issue and a big part of the critiquing of Shedeur Sanders' game while at Colorado. So this battle is going to begin shortly here in a few hours between Flacco and Pickett and Gabriel and Sanders. And no, that other guy will not be involved. However, and I keep saying this, and I want everybody to keep being reminded of this with 2 first-round picks in April of 2026, these guys might just be fighting for a part-time gig. The man who will hopefully lead this team into the Cleveland Browns' future and into the new building in Brook Park is probably getting ready right now for his own final season of college football. The wide receiver room, and it certainly has its questions. David Bell getting injured. David Bell being unavailable right now certainly does not help David Bell's chances. We all are in belief that we know Jerry Jeudy is the unquestionable number 1 wide receiver on this team. And just real quick, a lot of people, well, number 1, look, there are 32 number 1 wide receivers in the NFL. Top wide receiver in any team. You want to break it down to, are they, is he a top 10? Is it top 15? I'm not going to do that. But he is their top dog right now, and that is without question. We all hope Cedric Tillman can be somewhat close to the player he was in that 3-game stretch last year. But Cedric Tillman has certainly dealt with injury. He dealt with injury in his time in Tennessee. He dealt with injuries as a rookie for the Cleveland Browns. Certainly dealt with injuries last year in year 2 for the Cleveland Browns. Year 3, Cedric Tillman, the opportunity is there. Can he seize this full-time role? We will wait and see. Ideally, Deontay Johnson stays on course, and the Browns have a proven veteran guy in the slot. Ultimate wild card here with Deontay Johnson. It's, what his ability is, but it's more of whether or not how he's going to choose to handle himself, to how long he will stick around. A lot of people have high hopes for Jamari Thrash, and I'd say that's fair. But you do need to realize and keep in mind that Jamari Thrash is a 5th-round pick, was a 5th-round pick. Browns did not help themselves and certainly did not help Jamari Thrash by not utilizing him more last year. He should have gotten more opportunity. it wasn't hard to see that the season was lost and was lost pretty early. So Jamari Thrash could have gotten great, great work in last year, which would have made, hopefully, for an even better offseason for him. And he's been lauded and praised for his offseason work to this point. But if he were able to play more as a rookie in 2024, that certainly would have aided him as to what necessarily would have been on his priority list to improve upon going into this now his year 2 season. You know, Woods, of course, still here. You have the local flavor of the Ohio kids as undrafted free agents. The Browns are probably very much in the market for a wide receiver addition. And I still believe that possibility is going to come through trade. You are looking at some of these teams, and I highlighted the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as maybe a team, but the more I think I look at it, I think Tampa Bay understands that Chris Godwin, it's going to be a while. And the selection of Emeka Buku at the time, I thought was a head scratcher. But as we learned with Chris Godwin, there was another surgery in April. And so Godwin is certainly a while away from contributing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So the Buccaneers decided to just go extremely plus heavy at the position and wait and see how the Godwin situation works itself out. But there are still teams like the Patriots. There are still teams like the Green Bay Packers who have more wide receivers than they're going to be able to keep on their roster. The Browns will be doing their due diligence. The Browns will be active. I believe there could be not just one, possibly two wide receivers that will end up on the Cleveland Browns' first 53-man roster who are currently not with the organization. The rest of this group after Thrash is it's thin. It's really, really thin. And even with Thrash, we're going on the hope that Jamari Thrash is able to go and contribute. We don't necessarily have the evidence that's going to back that up. This wide receiver room certainly, again, needs work. This room, which is rated and ranked by PFF as the 32nd overall wide receiver room. And that is after what Jerry Jeudy did last year. So it just goes to show you, it's about the depth and the overall talent within a room, not just where you are at the top of your wide receiver room. Getting excited. Obviously, practice will begin today on Wednesday. Starting to, get these little battles in. I'm sure the, camp stats and quarterback charts will be all over the place, running rampant this afternoon, and certainly Thursday and Friday and Saturday. And I think they're off on Sunday, and then it's Monday, Tuesday, and I believe off again on Wednesday. But the team obviously staying in Berea this year for training camp. There was no reason to go back to West Virginia. You went in 2023. You had a successful season. You made the playoffs, so obviously you didn't change anything. You went back to West Virginia in 2024. Nothing went right in 2024, so there was no reason to repeat that plan. Superstition or not, whatever, it was break the mirror because at that point, because whatever you did for the 2024 season, as we all know, certainly did not pan out. So Mike Hall, your big story at this point, unfortunately for Mike Hall, getting there, improving, not ready for football practices just yet. No reason to necessarily view this as a bad sign for Mike Hall. The injury was severe. That was suffered, of course, at the end of the 2024 regular season. The hope and potential for Mike Hall is still extremely high. His timeline will tell a lot about how the Browns can handle this defensive tackle room, through the summer, through the end of the summer, and maybe just how they're going to have to handle this room once the regular season, of course, begins with week 1 and the Cincinnati Bengals. We'll get back to you today later. Again, we'll do our regular show at 6 o'clock. We'll have our first practice in the books. You will have Fred Greetham. You will have Barry McBride at 7 o'clock with OBR Weekly. Jacob Roche will be on at 8 with some summer scouting of some collegiate centers, a position that certainly could be of a high priority for the Cleveland Browns in the 2026 NFL Draft. I'm Jeff Lloyd. We appreciate everybody who comes to the OBR daily, whether it's the OBR.com for great written content from our writers. We see you guys. We look at the numbers. The numbers are picking up. We know football's in the air. You guys know football is in the air. Of course, the OBR streaming network beginning every night at 6 p.m. Eastern. Browns 3D. I told you the other shows that'll be following us here in the evening. So you'll have a show at 6, you'll have a show at 7, you'll have a show at 8. It is football season, and we are excited to go. Make sure you subscribe to the OBR on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the OBR over on Twitch. Make sure you are going to the OBR.com right now. Football season is here. If you have not had the VIP package from the OBR.com, I highly suggest you do. You get the insider information first. You can chat with all of us here at the OBR, get your questions answered, banter about. You can make fun of us. We'll joke a little bit with you about just how crazy our notions are for this Cleveland Browns 2025 season. Again, we appreciate everybody's support here at the OBR, and we are ready to launch into the 2025 Cleveland Browns season. This has been your daily delivery of all things dog pound. Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network. And we'll talk to y'all a little later.